Evelyn crouched at the base of the tree, her sharp eyes scanning the compound's edge as Argoz disappeared into the shadows. The northern lights cast a faint, shifting glow over the treetops, their eerie beauty making the scene feel more surreal than ever. Her focus, however, was drawn to something else entirely. To her left, past the barn, a faint trail wound through the trees. It led away from the compound, curling upward into the darkness of the forest. Her instincts prickled. Evelyn activated her comm, her voice low. "Caleb, you picking up anything unusual near the barn?" A moment later, Caleb's voice crackled through. "Nothing on my end. Why? What do you see?" "There's a path," Evelyn replied, her gaze narrowing. "It looks like it gets traffic. Heads into the trees toward where that helicopter came from." Evelyn hesitated, her instincts battling with her logical side. "I think this trail leads to something bigger. It's not on the compound's grid. It's something they don't want found." Caleb sighed, his voice tinged with frustration. "Then leave it for now." "Don't worry," Evelyn replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "I'm not stupid enough to go wandering off alone, but it's worth noting." As she studied the trail, Evelyn's thoughts returned to the helicopter that had taken off moments earlier. The timing was too perfect, the connection too strong to ignore. "This trail heads north," she murmured into the comm. "Same direction as the chopper. If I had to guess, I'd say there's another site out here. Something tied to that takeoff." "You're supposed to be keeping an eye on Argoz, remember?" Caleb said firmly. Evelyn rolled her eyes, though a small part of her knew he was right. "I haven't forgotten. Just keep it in mind. We might need to come back here." Evelyn's fingers tightened on the comm. "Argoz, what's your status?" The goblin's voice crackled through, calm but focused. "Closing in on the main building. No signs of trouble yet." Evelyn exhaled, her tension easing slightly. "Stay sharp. This place has more layers than we thought." As she settled in to wait, her eyes drifted back to the trail. Something about it felt unfinished, like a loose thread she couldn't let go of. But for now, it would have to wait. The forest was still, save for the faint crackle of leaves in the breeze. The northern lights shimmered faintly above the treetops. Caleb leaned against the truck, fidgeting with the comm in his hand, his eyes scanning the shadows. "All right," Caleb muttered, tossing the comm onto the dashboard. "Nature calls." Stepping away from the vehicle, he wandered toward the edge of the road, flashlight in hand. The faint beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the packed dirt and tangled underbrush. As Caleb reached a spot near the tree line, he paused. His flashlight caught something, a faint glimmer of ruts in the dirt, disappearing into the woods. A two-track trail, wide and well-used, stretched out ahead. "Guys!" Caleb said, his voice low but steady. "I think I found something." Stepping cautiously onto the two-track road he'd discovered, his flashlight traced the wide ruts in the dirt, his brows furrowing. "This isn't just some trail," he muttered. "Looks like trucks. Lots of them." Grabbing his comm, he spoke into it. "Hey, team? I've got something here." Evelyn's voice crackled through. "Define something." "Another road," Caleb replied, glancing over his shoulder. "Well used. Leads northwest. Could be tied to the chopper." Evelyn sighed audibly. "Stay by the truck, Caleb. Don't wander off." "I wasn't planning to," he muttered, but his curiosity itched. His eyes lingered on the trail, its faint curve disappearing into the trees. The forest loomed heavy around them, the faint glow of the northern lights providing a surreal backdrop to the dark treetops. Inside the large building, Argoz moved silently through the dimly lit halls, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. The classrooms were far from abandoned, desks were neatly arranged, whiteboards bore fresh notes, and the faint smell of coffee lingered in the air. She paused in one of the rooms, her gaze flicking to a training schedule pinned to the wall. "Training exercises, daily schedules. This place is active," she muttered, her voice just above a whisper. Moving down the corridor, she pushed open the door to one of the offices. This space, unlike the classrooms, was eerily quiet. A thin layer of dust coated the desk, the chair pushed slightly askew. Filing cabinets lined the walls, their drawers locked and labels faded with time. The contrast was stark. The office felt abandoned, but the classrooms hummed with the presence of those who had only just left. Her comm crackled softly. "Argoz," Evelyn's voice whispered. "Any movement inside?" "No, but the classrooms are definitely used. Offices, not so much," Argoz replied, her voice low. "What's your status?" "Still clear," Evelyn said. K9 patrol circled back toward the barn. Caleb's gone quiet, though. Argoz frowned, her hand brushing the hilt of her blade. "Quiet how?" "He's not answering the comms," Evelyn said, her tone tight. "He was at the truck. Now? Nothing." Argoz's frown deepened. "I'll finish up here and head to you." Evelyn crouched near the base of a tree, her sharp eyes darting between the barn and the faint glow of the dormitories in the distance. The compound was alive with activity even in the late hours. Lights flickered in windows, and faint laughter carried on the breeze. But her focus was on the truck she couldn't see, parked over 200 yards away through the thick forest. "Caleb, do you copy?" she whispered into her comm. "What's your status?" Silence. She keyed the comm again, frustration creeping into her voice. "Caleb, this isn't funny. Answer me." The radio crackled faintly, but there was no response. Evelyn's hand tightened around the charm at her waist, her instincts prickling. Something was wrong. "Argoz, Caleb's not answering," she said quietly, switching channels. Minutes later, Argoz emerged from the building's shadowed entrance, her sharp gaze sweeping the compound. She spotted Evelyn crouched near the tree line and made her way over, her steps deliberate and silent. "What's going on?" Argoz asked. Evelyn gestured toward the woods. "Caleb's been out of contact for the past 5 minutes. He said something about finding a trail earlier, but now, radio silence." Argoz glanced toward the distant outline of the forest, her expression darkening. 5 minutes is too long. He should have checked in. Navigating through the dense forest, the two women moved cautiously. The glow of the northern lights had faded, leaving the woods bathed in shadow. When they finally reached the truck, it was exactly where Caleb had left it. Engine off, doors closed. But the driver's side door was slightly ajar, and Caleb was nowhere to be found. "Where the hell is he?" Argoz muttered, her sharp eyes scanning the surrounding woods. Evelyn crouched near the truck, her fingers brushing the dirt. "Tracks," she said, pointing to faint footprints leading away from the vehicle, heading northwest. Argoz followed the trail with her eyes, her jaw tightening. "Why didn't he tell us he was leaving the truck?" "Maybe he saw something," Evelyn said. "But if that's the case, why not radio it in?" Argoz sighed, her hand tightening on her blade. "We can't leave him out here alone. Let's move." Rose sat in her usual corner booth, her legs crossed and a glowing glass of something potent in her hand. The comm radio rested discreetly on the table before her, its soft crackle blending seamlessly into the bar's ambient noise. Her dark eyes flicked over the room, catching every subtle shift and ripple in the atmosphere. A well-dressed vampire exchanged a handshake with a witch near the bar. A troll grumbled over the price of an artifact in the back corner. It was all background noise to her now. She adjusted the comm's frequency slightly, her sharp ears catching the faint exchange between Evelyn and Argoz. "Caleb, do you copy?" Evelyn's voice came through the comm, her tone edged with concern. "What's your status?" Rose tilted her head, interest piqued. Her lips curved into a small smirk as she swirled her drink idly. "Oh, what's this?" she muttered to herself, leaning forward. "Argoz." Evelyn's voice crackled again. "Caleb's not answering. He said he found a trail earlier, but now... nothing." Rose's smirk faded slightly, her expression sharpening. She tapped a finger against the rim of her glass. her mind already spinning with possibilities. She clicked her own comm. "Care to explain why you're losing team members, darlings?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I thought this was supposed to be stealthy." Evelyn's voice came through, clipped and tight. "Not now, Rose." "Oh, I think it's very much now," Rose replied, her voice low and smooth. "If you've lost Caleb, you're not exactly in the best position to tell me when to butt out." "Rose," Argoz's voice cut in, calm but laced with warning. "Stand down." Rose's smirk returned, though her eyes narrowed. "Fine, but I'm listening." As the minutes ticked by, Rose listened intently, her drink forgotten. Evelyn and Argoz's voices wove through the static, piecing together the scene. The truck, the trail, the unexplained silence from Caleb. It all painted a picture that didn't sit right with her. She caught the faint edge of tension in Evelyn's voice as she muttered, "He hasn't responded for 5 minutes. This isn't like him." Argoz's voice was measured but cold. "We follow the trail. If he's wandered off, we'll find him." Rose tapped the comm again. "And if he hasn't just wandered off, what then?" The silence that followed was telling. "Well, don't let me stop you," Rose said dryly. "Go play hero. I'll be here when it all falls apart." She leaned back in her chair, her eyes darkening as she glanced around the bar. Something about the situation didn't feel right, and the unease creeping into her chest was unfamiliar and unwelcome. Rose's attention snapped back to the room as a familiar figure approached her booth. Silas loomed over her, his expression as unreadable as ever. "What are you listening to?" he asked, his gravelly voice low. "Just a little field trip my friends are on," Rose replied smoothly, gesturing to the comm. "One of them decided to play hide-and-seek, and now the others are scrambling to find him." Silas arched a brow, his dark eyes flicking to the radio. "You should tell them to pull back." Rose tilted her head, intrigued. "And why's that?" "This isn't just some random forest," Silas said, his tone weighty. "If they've stumbled onto what I think they have, they're playing a very dangerous game." Rose's smirk softened, a flicker of genuine curiosity in her gaze. "Do tell." Silas shook his head. "Not here. Just make sure they don't get themselves killed." Rose watched him retreat into the shadows, her fingers brushing the comm as Evelyn's voice came through again, fainter now. "We're at the truck, he's not here." The forest was a sea of darkness, illuminated only by the brilliant shimmer of countless stars overhead. Their silvery light filtered through the canopy, casting faint patches of glow on the forest floor. Every step Argoz and Evelyn took seemed amplified in the eerie silence, each crackle of leaves beneath their boots grating against their nerves. Argoz crouched low, her sharp eyes tracking the faint impressions in the dirt. The boot prints, barely discernible now, were interspersed with something else, prints that didn't belong to Caleb. "These tracks," Argoz murmured, running her fingers along a deep indentation. Something big was here. Evelyn, standing a few paces behind, kept her knife at the ready. "Big like a bear? Or big like not a bear?" "Not a bear," Argoz said flatly. "Too uniform. And whatever it was, it had claws." She pointed to faint gouges along the path, their edges glinting faintly under the starlight. Evelyn's gaze darted around the forest, her instincts prickling. The darkness felt alive, shifting with unseen movement. "Caleb, do you copy?" She tried again into her comm. The faint static hiss of dead air was her only answer. As they pressed on, the trail became harder to follow. The undergrowth thickened, and the prints blurred into patches of loose dirt and crushed leaves. Just when Evelyn was about to suggest turning back, her boot struck something hard. She knelt, picking up the broken comm radio from the dirt. Her breath caught as she examined it. The casing was cracked, the wires frayed, and the antenna had been severed. Not by wear, but by force. "Something bit it," Evelyn said, her voice tight. She held it up to Argoz, who knelt beside her. Argoz examined the damage, her brow furrowing. This wasn't just an animal. The bite marks are too clean, too strong. Evelyn nodded grimly, shifting her flashlight toward the ground. The faint beam illuminated a drag trail in the dirt, leading away from the broken radio and into the thicker forest. "Looks like something or someone was dragged," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. Following the trail, they came upon a small clearing. The ground was churned and scarred as though a violent struggle had taken place. Broken branches littered the area, and small tufts of fur or hair clung to the jagged edges of nearby bushes. Evelyn crouched, running her fingers over deep gouges in the dirt. This wasn't a simple fight. This was brutal. Argoz stepped carefully through the clearing, her sharp eyes darting from one disturbed patch of earth to the next. "These prints, they're too large to be Caleb's. And these," she said, pointing to massive paw prints pressed into the dirt, "aren't canine. Too wide, too deep." Evelyn's flashlight caught something glinting on the ground, a faint splatter of blood trailing toward the far side of the clearing. "Caleb," she whispered, her throat tightening. Argoz glanced at the faint drag marks leading away from the clearing. Her jaw clenched, but her voice remained steady. "We don't know that yet. Let's keep moving." Evelyn straightened, her grip tightening on her blade. "If we follow this, we could be walking into whatever did this, and if it's still here—" "Do we have a choice?" Argoz cut in, her tone colder than usual. "We can't leave him out here." Evelyn hesitated, glancing at the trail ahead. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to regroup, to come back with more information and better preparation. But Caleb was out there, and leaving him behind wasn't an option. Finally, Evelyn exhaled, her resolve hardening. "All right, let's go. But we stick together." Argoz smirked faintly, the tension in her posture easing just slightly. "Wouldn't dream of it." The two pressed forward into the dark, the starlight above casting fleeting patches of light on the disturbed ground ahead. The Shadow Realm bar buzzed around her, but Rose wasn't paying attention. She sat in her usual booth, one leg crossed over the other, a glowing amber drink untouched on the table. Her mind churned with Silas's words from earlier, his warning echoing in her thoughts. "You went looking for the pack? You're lucky to still have your people. If they've stumbled onto pack territory, Rose, they're not just playing with fire, they're dousing themselves in gasoline and lighting the match." Rose had waved him off in the moment, masking her unease with sarcasm, but now her fingers drummed against the table, her comm radio in her other hand. The faint static from the device filled the silence as she tapped into the team's frequency. "Status report," she barked, her voice cutting through the crackle. "Evelyn, Argoz, where are we?" There was a pause before Evelyn's voice came through, tense and laced with frustration. "We're following a trail. Caleb's still missing." Rose's smirk faded, replaced by a sharp glare. "Missing? You let him wander off? I thought you were supposed to be watching each other's backs." Argoz's voice cut in, calm but icy. "He didn't just wander off, Rose. Something dragged him. We're tracking him now." "Dragged him?" Rose's grip on the comm tightened. "By what exactly?" "We're not sure yet," Evelyn admitted. "We found his radio. Broken. Something bit through it. And there's evidence of a struggle." Rose exhaled sharply, her eyes narrowing. "Do you have any idea what you might have walked into?" "We're figuring that out as we go," Argoz said flatly. "Unless you've got some insight to share, feel free to let us handle it." Rose leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "Listen carefully, Argoz. You're on thin ice. Silas told me exactly what kind of territory you might have walked into. If this is pack ground, and it's starting to sound like it is, you're not just poking the bear. You're poking an entire den of wolves with a very short stick." Evelyn's voice came back, calmer but firm. "Rose, we didn't see any signs that this was pack territory when we got here. No warnings, no clear boundaries." "That's the point," Rose snapped. "The pack doesn't leave warnings. They don't need to. Their territory is sacred to them, and anyone stupid enough to cross into it gets the same treatment, whether they meant to or not." There was a pause, the weight of her words settling over the team. "Get Caleb and get out," Rose ordered. "Now!" Evelyn's voice crackled through the comm, firmer this time. "With all due respect, Rose, we're not leaving him behind. Not until we know he's safe." Rose pinched the bridge of her nose, her frustration boiling over. "Fine, but don't come crying to me when you've got a pack of angry wolves on your tail." "Noted," Argoz said dryly. "Anything else, Your Majesty?" Rose rolled her eyes, her smirk returning faintly. "Just don't get yourselves killed. And keep me updated." She released the button on the comm, her fingers brushing against the bracelet on her wrist as she leaned back in her chair. Her gaze drifted over the bar, but her mind remained on the team. As much as she loathed to admit it, Silas's warning had rattled her. Argoz and Evelyn pressed forward, the faint trail winding through the dense forest. The terrain became steeper, their breaths puffing in the cool night air as they climbed. Starlight filtered through the treetops, casting eerie shadows across the uneven ground. Each step felt heavier, the weight of Rose's warning still lingering in their minds. "Do you feel that?" Evelyn murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She paused, her blade in hand as she scanned the trees around them. Argoz stopped beside her, her sharp eyes narrowing. "The air, it's different here." It wasn't just the silence of the forest or the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. The air hummed faintly, an almost imperceptible vibration that prickled against their skin. They pushed through the final line of trees, emerging into a large open field. The starlight illuminated the scene before them, a sprawling compound dominated by a massive building with high, imposing walls. The building's exterior stretched 30 feet into the air, its stone and steel construction radiating an aura of impenetrability. Evelyn's gaze snapped to the signs staked at intervals around the field's edge. "Federal property, no trespassing," was printed in bold letters, the warnings underscored by the unmistakable energy emanating from the building itself. "This isn't just any facility," Evelyn whispered, her voice tinged with unease. She adjusted her grip on her blade, her eyes scanning the field for any signs of movement. Argoz crouched low, her sharp gaze fixed on the building. "It's not federal either. Not in the way they're claiming. This kind of energy." She trailed off, her instincts humming with alarm. "It's magic. Strong magic." From their position, the faint thrum of power seemed to pulse outward from the building, a steady rhythm that vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. It wasn't just the walls themselves that exuded this energy. There was something deeper, more ancient, embedded in the very foundation of the compound. "It's like the whole place is alive," Evelyn muttered, taking a cautious step forward. "Do you feel it? Like it's watching us?" Argoz nodded slowly, her claws twitching at her sides. "It's not just watching. It's reacting." She tilted her head, her expression sharp. "We're not going any closer until we know what we're dealing with." Evelyn frowned, her gaze sweeping the area. "The signs are clear. This isn't somewhere we're supposed to be, and that means Caleb's here." Argoz's smirk was faint but determined. "Then we'll just have to be smarter than them." Evelyn dropped into a crouch beside her, her eyes narrowing as she traced the perimeter of the field. "We need to figure out how to get closer without triggering anything. If this place is as warded as it feels, the moment we step out of these trees we'll be exposed." "Agreed," Argoz said, her voice low and focused. She scanned the building's exterior, her sharp eyes locking onto faint glimmers of light embedded into the walls. Wards, carefully placed and clearly active. Her gaze swept to the far side of the compound, where a smaller building stood just inside the perimeter. It was less imposing than the main structure, but its proximity to the walls suggested importance. "Over there," Argoz said, nodding toward it. "That might give us a clue." Evelyn followed her line of sight, nodding. "Let's stick to the tree line for now. Keep low and keep quiet." Argoz and Evelyn crouched low as they moved west along the tree line, keeping the massive compound in sight but maintaining their cover. The faint hum of magic pulsing from the building seemed to intensify the closer they moved to the edge of the bluff, vibrating subtly through the ground beneath their boots. Evelyn paused, glancing down at her comm. "Still nothing," she muttered, tapping it futilely. The silence from the device only confirmed what they already suspected. Their radios were useless this close to the pack's territory. "Figures," Argoz said, her voice low and sharp. "They probably have dampening fields or tech keeping us dark. Makes sense if they're trying to stay hidden." "Or they're just that good at keeping people out," Evelyn replied, her grip tightening on her blade as her eyes scanned the terrain. "This place isn't just defended, it's fortified." As they crept further west, a faint noise began to cut through the eerie silence of the forest. Argos's sharp ears twitched at the sound, and she held up a hand to stop Evelyn. They both froze, listening intently. A low, rhythmic roar echoed in the distance, growing louder with each step. It was the unmistakable sound of waves crashing against a rocky shore. Evelyn's gaze darted toward the west. "The lake," she murmured, her voice tinged with realization. "We're near Lake Michigan." Argoz smirked faintly, her sharp eyes scanning the faint glow of starlight reflecting off the treetops ahead. "Didn't think we'd get a scenic view tonight." They pressed on cautiously, the sound of the waves growing louder with each step. The forest began to thin, the trees giving way to rocky outcroppings and patches of tall grass. Finally, they reached the edge of the bluff. The sight before them was breathtaking and haunting all at once. The dark expanse of Lake Michigan stretched out to the horizon, the starlight shimmering on its restless surface. The waves crashed against the jagged rocks far below, their roar filling the night air. Evelyn crouched at the edge, peering down at the steep drop. "It's beautiful," she admitted, her voice softer now. "But it doesn't exactly scream escape route." Argoz stood beside her, her sharp eyes scanning the shoreline below. "No, but it tells us something about where we are. They've got the lake to the west and that compound to the east. They don't leave much room for anyone to sneak in or out." Evelyn nodded, her gaze shifting back toward the compound. "It also means Caleb's options for running are limited. If he's here, they'll have him locked down tight." Argos's sharp eyes caught something in the distance, a faint glow emanating from a narrow trail that wound down the side of the bluff. It was barely visible in the darkness, but it was there. She pointed toward it. "Look, a path. It might lead to something." Evelyn followed her gaze, her brow furrowing. "A path down? Why would they have that here?" "Maybe it's not for them," Argoz suggested, her tone cautious. "Could be for deliveries, or for people trying to escape." Evelyn considered the possibility, glancing back toward the compound. "It's risky. If we take it, we're exposed." Argoz smirked, her confidence returning. "Everything's a risk, Evelyn, but if Caleb's on the move, this could give us a better shot at finding him."
Well, you found your way to the end, haven't you? That must mean you're curious, and we love curiosity around here. Before you vanish into the ether, take a moment to subscribe. It's just a click, and trust me, you'll want to stay in the loop for what comes next. And while you're at it, give the video a like. The energy exchange is good for you. Hit that notification bell too. You wouldn't want to miss out on any of our magical misadventures. Who knows what I might conjure up next. Alright, off you go. But remember, I'll know if you didn't subscribe. See you on the other side.